So good afternoon, shalom lekulam. Welcome to the department seminar of the Jewish Art Department of Maryland University. And today we are really honored to host Martina Colombi, a researcher from Italy. Martina has recently obtained her PhD in Literature, Arts, and Environmental Heritage at the University of Milan. Her studies focus on the history of collecting and the art of market in Milan in the 19th century. She currently works for the National Trust for Italy, Fondo Ambiente Italiano. She has collaborated with the Poi di Pezzoli Museum in Milan and the Accademia Carrara Museum in Bergamo. Among her scientific publications, the most significant are the articles The Madonna and the Child with St. Francis and Dominic and Angels by Giulio Cesare Procaccini, the masterpiece from the Arkinto collection, and Milanese antique dealers and the international market, Giuseppe Baslini, and the and Milanese and the Grandi family company. And today, Martina will talk about Milan and the art market in the second half of the 19th century. So without further ado, Martina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for introducing me, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for this kind invitation, and I thank you so much for joining this afternoon. I know that your presence today is truly meaningful. I know that it is a really difficult time for you, and I hope that this lecture will offer some meaningful insights, and maybe it will help to keep your mind occupied, even if for just a little while. Before we begin, I would like to thank a lot Marianne Farkas, who studied with me in Italy. She's an extraordinary scholar, but she's also one of my closest friends. The topics I will be discussing in these lectures are drawn from my PhD dissertation, which was focused on the art market in Milan during the second half of the 19th century, with particular attention on two figures: Giuseppe Baslini, who was without doubt the most important art dealer active in Milan in the second half of the 19th century, and the Grandi family company. It was an experience extremely fascinating for me because it required a non-traditional methodological approach. The history of the art market is in fact not so explored in Italy, and there are only few significant studies available. So I had to work a lot in the archives, using not only letters but also auction catalogs, invoices, shipping records, guest books, account books, and even a post-mortem inventory. It was also interesting because art dealers in the 19th century were really fascinating figures. They were clever and at the same time unscrupulous, not simply vendors, but mediators, informers, connoisseurs, and they are really astonishing for their accurate and systematic monitoring of the market trends. They had also a widespread network of contacts, for example, collectors, artists, restorers, museums, academies, dealers, publishers, and also booksellers. For European art dealers, the context in the 19th century was particularly favorable. In fact, since the last decade of the 18th century onwards, there was a progressive internationalization of the European art market, which culminated in the mid-19th century and which saw art dealers as major players. The circulation of goods, people, and informations was facilitated thanks to improvements in transport infrastructure, increasingly effective networks and information systems, and a growing recognition of the value of national schools, which were used for the first time by art dealers as a true commercial brand. In this period emerged also a new class of art buyers of bourgeois origin, which generally had more modest aspiration if compared to the collectors of the previous centuries. This emergence of a new class of collectors was further encouraged by publishers. Books, manuals, auction catalogs, and also specialized magazines became accessible to aspiring collectors and connoisseurs. The most striking phenomenon was represented by the market for reproductive prints. For reproductive print, I'm intending engraved reproductions of famous paintings, in some cases also sculptures, which were particularly widespread between the 17th and the 19th century. These works were created using printmaking techniques such as burin engravings or etching, and these prints were not mere copies, but they were artistic interpretations of artworks in a graphic form. We have to imagine that the aim of these prints was to translate the original image into black and white, enhancing its light, its volumes, and also its details. Reproductive prints played a crucial role for the dissemination of art, and they were also a tool for education in art academies. They also attracted a very broad audience because they were not so expensive, so they could be achieved, they could be bought from the richest and also most refined collectors to the emerging bourgeois class and also academy professors. In the 19th century, the leading position in the trade not only of reproductive prints but also of artworks in general was held by London. Its market employed sophisticated and innovative strategies such as advertising, subscriptions, and also descriptive catalogs. In the British market, Italian art generated significant interest, attributed not only to the fact that there was a massive and continuous arrival of paintings, but it was also due to the great success enjoyed in the previous century by the work of Italian expatriates in London who promoted the masterpieces of ancient and modern masters through reproductive engravings. The most famous of them, maybe someone of you have heard about him, was Francesco Bartolozzi. From such a favorable context, Italian art dealers obtained significant benefits. To enter the London market, they often partnered with compatriots already residing there, or with English merchants. For example, this strategy was adopted by the Grandi Company, whose business in London, which was focused especially, as we will see, on the trade of reproductive prints, was mediated by this man, Marseille Middleton Holloway, which was the owner of a shop in London. We will see that Grandi's connections were not limited to Britain and London. They extended to Switzerland, France, Belgium, Germany, and even present-day Ukraine. Their private negotiations were combined with public sales opportunities, not only the annual exhibitions organized by the Academy, but also starting from the mid-19th century, the great exhibitions, which were utilized as showcases or networking moments or simple business opportunities. Antonio and Carlo Grandi, for example, visited the Great Exhibition in London in June 1862, and also through the mediation of Marseille Middleton Holloway, they organized a successful public sale of reproductive prints that year. But let us now look at the Italian context and the role that the city of Milan played in it. At that time, the undisputed capital of Italian art market was no longer Florence and Rome, but Milan, The supremacy of Milan was guaranteed by a continuous influx of masterpieces, which came from the Habsburg and Napoleonic suppressions of religious orders, but which was also a consequence of the unification of Italy in 1861 and the crisis of Italian aristocracy, which was often forced to alienate its treasures. These artworks came not only from Lombardy, but they came also from the Veneto and the old Papal States. Their circulation was at the time really frenetic, not because it was not yet restricted by heritage protection laws, which were introduced effectively only at the beginning of the following century. It was really an opportunity without precedent, which benefited, among the others, Milanese collectors, such as Gian Giacomo Pol di Pezzoli, or the brothers Fausto and Giuseppe Bagatti Valsecchi, creators of two historic houses, museums, that are still open to the public today. But from the mid-century onward, representatives from important European museums arrived in Milan. Among the first, Charles Lockheath-Lake, the first director of the National Gallery in London, and his traveling agent, Otto Mundler, and about 20 years later, also Willem von Bode, which was sent on behalf of the Gemäldegalerie in Berlin by the director Julius Meyer. The arrival of these figures with significant purchasing power and prestige established Milan's role beyond national borders. Finally, a lively impulse to the Milanese art market was provided by the birth, in the last quarter of the century, of the first Italian auction houses, operated by Giulio Sambon, Casimir Cipriot, and Angelo Genolini. Now I must begin with an apology, but it will allow me to offer a brief introduction to the Jewish presence in Milan at that time, and to the professions that Jews practiced in the city during that period. In the presentation I sent to Marianne almost a year ago, I stated that among the Jewish contacts of Giuseppe Baslini was this man, Giulio Sambon. Giulio Sambon was born in Naples to a French father. He was an important antiquarian, numismatist, and also an art collector. After moving to Paris, he became well known across Europe for his prestigious collection of ancient art and for organizing renowned auction sales. While I was reading about this figure, who has only recently been rediscovered in Italy, I came across information suggesting that he was of Jewish origins. Information that I later disproved through further research. So I'm really sorry about that. But however, this mistake gives me the opportunity to introduce a document I came across during my research. At the Civico Historical Archive of Milan, there is a list of the names of all Jews who were residing or domiciled in Milan from the beginning of the 19th century until 1861, which was the year of Italian unification. This list is organized alphabetically by family units, according to the surname of the head of the household, and it specifies for each individual the names of the father and mother, date and place of birth, the year they began residing in Milan, but also and especially their profession, marital status, and, if applicable, date of death. The purpose of this register, which is explicitly separates the Jews from the rest of Milanese population, is not entirely clear. But we know that after 1815, the Austrian government in Milan implemented discriminatory measures against Jews. For example, Christians were not allowed to marry non-Christians. Jews could not work in public offices or could not practice as pharmacists or notaries, and they could not testify in Christian wills. But regardless of the original intent behind this document, I would like to emphasize its importance because thanks to this document, we know that the Jewish presence in Milan in the 19th century amounted to around 102 individuals. Jews lived in specific neighborhoods of the city, and they primarily worked as merchants. They were second-hand dealers, jewelry sellers, brokers, selling clothing and liquid merchants, also pipe makers, landowners, lawyers, and there was even a restorer of prints and antique books. Among the merchants, there were also prominent bankers, such as the Wilshot brothers and Leon David Levy. But, however, no art dealers are recorded in these documents. And this is probably due to the fact that this was a very rare profession, even in a large and vibrant context like that of Milan. So, as I mentioned earlier, the most important art dealer active in Milan in the second half of the 19th century was Giuseppe Baslini, which was born in 1817 and died in 1887. The time at my disposal is too short for me to go through Baslini's biography, however exciting and, according to his contemporary, full of spicy anecdotes. I only remember one aspect, that was the most surprising for me. Baslini was a true self-made man. He moved to Milan at a very young age with no capital and no education, and managed to become the most important dealer in paintings and object d'art in Milan, thanks only to his connoisseurship, his business flair, and his great entrepreneurship, which led him to revolutionize the profession of art merchant, making it more complex, original, and multifaceted. Regarding his beginnings, which are still veiled by mystery, we only know that Baslini's first job in Milan was an apprenticeship in a cabinet-making workshop. Baslini's success is witnessed by the writings of his contemporaries who admired but at the same time fiercely criticized him. Among them there are, for example, Bode's autobiography and the travel notebooks of Charles Locke Eastlake and Otto Mundler. But the antiquarian's fortune is also attested by archive materials, in particular a document that was long forgotten among the papers of the notary archives in Milan. It is his post-mortem inventory, rediscovered in 2017 by the scholar Monia Faraoni, who was generously shared with me. Filled out in 1887, this inventory describes all movable and immovable property owned by Baslini at the time of his death. The merchant's extensive property holdings are really impressive. He had a building in Via Monte Napoleone, which was one of the most central and prominent streets in the city, with 3 warehouses, 2 shops, and his home. He had also flats at number 13 and 15 in the same street, another home with a shop in another street of Milan, but also lands, houses and a mansion in Merate, a place located about 40 kilometers from Milan. The inventory shed light also on several other aspects of the dealer's business. Firstly, the heterogeneity of his interests. He bought and sell not only paintings, but also ivories, bronzes, jewelry, porcelain, glass, textiles, which made him an important reference for eclectic collectors, particularly the owner of house museums in Milan and beyond. I have compared this post-mortem inventory with the catalogue of a Milanese sale organized by Baslini years in 1888 after the death of Giuseppe Baslini in the halls of Giulio Sambon's auction house. The similarities between the inventory and the catalog are very, very close. So this means that none of Baslini's 5 sons had any intention of continuing their father's business. But despite this, as I will demonstrate in a few minutes, his professional legacy would not have been extinguished. Among more than 1,000 objects presented at this auction, which had a truly international resonance, a few have been identified. I will only mention from the Trivulzio collection, which was one of the most important collections in Milan at that time, a group of ivories, but also this painting representing Saint John the Baptist with a lamb by Lorenzo Costa, which is kept since 1960 in the Pinacoteca di Brera, together with the preparatory drawing. This portrait of a clergyman by Giovan Battista Moroni, which the Musée du Louvre acquired on this occasion. An ancient copy of a famous painting by Lorenzo Lotto, which remained, the original one is at the Gemäldegalerie in Berlin, but the copy remained at least until 1960s with Baslini's ears. And finally, a bronze group by Massimiliano Soldani Benzi, which now is kept in the Seattle Art Museum. Baslini played also an important role, as I already said before, in the formation of the collection of the Museo Polli Pezzoli, one of the most important house museums not only in Italy, but all over Europe. There was really a trust-based relationship between Baslini and the Count Gian Giacomo Polli Pezzoli, which guaranteed the collector priority in purchases and advantages in payments, and which would continue even after his death. Baslini had dealings also with the Bagatti-Valsecchi brothers, owners of another house museum in Milan, as documented by 7 invoices and 2 letters that I found in the archives of this house museum, proving that between 1878 and 1885, Baslini sold a huge number of objects to the collectors, which in many cases I was able to identify. Arms and armors, bronze and copper objects, gold jewelry, textile, for example, the red textile for this room, decorative wooden elements, sculptures, and also 4 paintings on wood. But Baslini's business went well beyond Milan and Lombardy. In Italy, he had many connections in Vercelli, Genoa, and also in Florence, where he was in touch with his colleague, the famous art dealer Stefano Bardini. In 1882, he helped him to illegally export to France 2 Botticelli frescoes from the Villanelli, which are now kept in the Louvre. This sale had been blocked by the ministry in Italy, but the 2 merchants used an intermediary and had the frescoes smuggled through Milan. He also dealt with Rome, where he had a prestigious client, the Marquis Giampietro Campana, who bought a real masterpiece from him, which had also attracted the interest of the National Gallery, the lunette of Cosme Tura's Roverella Polyptych, which now is in the Louvre. But even more interesting, however, are Baslini's international dealings, which followed 3 different routes: London, Berlin, and Paris. Both in London and Berlin were the 2 buyers with the greatest purchasing power in Europe in the second half of the 19th century, the National Gallery and the Gemäldegalerie. Baslini's transactions with the National Gallery are undoubtedly the most successful and also the best known to scholars. They were started under the direction of Istrik, but they continued also with William Boxall and Friedrich William Barton, who bought no less than 23 paintings from him, but also coming from Baslini's workshop are 6 paintings donated to the museum in 1916 by Sir Austen Henry Layard. Reading through Eastlake's and Mundler's travel diaries, it is clear that Baslini adopted a far-sighted business strategy towards these powerful clients, presenting himself not only as a provider, but also as an informer, mediator, and consultant. This aspect of his profession, which his guarantee and secret of his success, is also emphasized by Bode in his autobiography, The Mein Leben, a useful witness for tracing the relationship between Baslini and Berlin. Bode reports in his autobiography not only the successful deals with Baslini, for example, the acquisition of a Madonna and Child by Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio and a portrait of a young man by Cristoforo Solari, which is kept from 1946 in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, but also the opportunities missed because of Mayer, whose continuous reconsiderations in most cases favored the English competitors, so the National Gallery. Among these, there are these famous group of wonderful Italian Renaissance paintings by Moretto, Moroni, and Savoldo, and also this Andrea Solario's portrait of a man with a pink. These artworks are all now in the National Gallery in London. In the archives of the Berlin State Museum, I found also 15 letters sent by Baslini to Mayer and Bode between 1870 and 1879. Baslini's first missive is quite funny because it is a real business card. He not only proposes himself as a supplier of masterpieces, but also states that he is ready to negotiate, to buy works of art on behalf of the museum, to travel. He also says in his letter that he has several networks, so he can introduce Bode to important Italian galleries or act as a mediator in his absence to later join him in Berlin. Looking through the correspondence, it is evident that the German museum took advantage of the different services offered by the antiquarian, and also took advantage of his multiple connections, not only in Milan, but also in Verona, Genoa, Florence, Rome, and also in London. In December 1875, Mayer commissioned Baslini to buy a small reliquary, now ascribed to a follower of Pietro Perugini, which was bought from a Florentine banker whose name was Brini. For a fee of 2,000 francs, a very high percentage if we consider that the total value of the deal was 19,500 francs, Baslini handled the negotiations, the export formalities, and also the shipment of the painting. He was also a very useful consultant and informer. Thanks to his recommendations, the museum purchased in 1873 from Harry and Janet Ross in Florence The Education of Pan by Luca Signorelli, a painting which was lost during the Second World War. Finally, Baslini proposed himself several times as a seller, offering to the museum artworks in his shop. Many of them were rejected by the museum, but they later proved to be museum-worthy. For example, from the Medius collection in Genoa, he proposed this Renaissance bronze replica of the Mercury Belvedere, that is now at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. But particularly interesting are the negotiations for the Lodi Madonna, donated by Count János Pálffy to the Museum of Fine Arts in Budapest in 1908. Baslini, who had bought and already tried unsuccessfully to sell it to the National Gallery, had planned a Berlin destination for this work, before selling it to the Hungarian Count. This altarpiece was even sent to Berlin in January 1873, and it was examined for a long time before being returned to Milan unsuccessfully in July. Baslini also found good strategies for doing business in Paris, where he found a lively and competitive art market. He organized there 2 sales at the Hôtel Drouot in Paris. The first one, in 1862, was an auction of furniture and object d'art. And the second one, the most interesting, in 1868, was a sale of paintings. In this sale, over 80 paintings from illustrious Lombard collections were offered for sale. The catalogue is unfortunately not illustrated, and it only refers to the iconography and the attribution of the paintings, and this has a bit complicated the identification of the pieces, but this identification has however been successful. in some cases. So I will run very quickly through the lots I've been able to identify, also with the help of my professors, Giovanni Agosti and Jacopo Stoppa. This Madonna and Child by Andrea da Murano, which was formerly in a private collection in Rome and then in the Cini collection in Venice. The Crucifixion with Scenes of the Passion by Antonio Campi, now at the Louvre. A copy of the portrait of Isabella de' Medici by Bronzino, housed at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, 1878. A work attributed to Giorgione depicted the drunken Silenus, which may correspond to a fragment by Cina da Conegliano, now in the Johnson collection in Philadelphia. This Madonna and Child with St. John and St. Jerome by Palma il Vecchio, purchased in 1930 from the Museum of Fine Arts in Budapest. Another Madonna and Child by Marco Palmezzano. This artwork was signed and dated, and after numerous transfers, it ended up at the Fondazione Cassa di Risparmio di Cesena, which is in central Italy. And finally, this painting, A Last Supper by Giambattista Tiepolo, which I'm quite sure to compare to a painting now in the Louvre. Even if none of Baslini's 5 children took over the paternal trade, as I already said before, his professional legacy did not end with his death. Marianna, his wife, was in fact the daughter of the art merchant Antonio Grandi, who had started a family business in Corso di Porta Orientale, now Corso di Porta Venezia, in the mid-19th century, initially specialized in antique drawings and prints. The son of Antonio, whose name was Antonio, so Antonio Jr., then expanded his business, including paintings and art objects, so inheriting and partly continuing his uncle's affairs. The researches on the Grandi family company was made possible thanks to a private act of generosity. In 2018, the Grandi heirs opened their family private archive to a group of students from the University of Milan. This archive, largely preserved over time, includes a wide number of materials: the catalogues of the family's private collection, the accounting books, and also the correspondence. These documents, together with the family's collections of drawings and prints, were donated in 2023 to the FAI, the National Trust for Italy, for which I'm actually working. It is only by chance, but this family is always following me. The accounting books represent an incomplete documentation because they were compiled only from 1888 onwards, so they do not account for the first 37 years of Grandi's business. So the correspondence is more significant because it consists in nearly 600 documents, including letters, drafts, invoices, and shipping records. Even if they are very heterogeneous and unorganized, these sheets testify to the entire trajectory of Grandi Company, from the beginning to the decline, and have permitted the reconstruction of its strategies, contacts, and activities. I will briefly outline the history of the company. Based in Milan since 1851, Antonio Grandi's business has older roots. As early as 1810, his great-uncle Antonio Pini had established a trade in prints, frames, and glass in Bellagio on Lake Como. Of Antonio's 9 heirs, only Carlo and Antonio continued this profession. Crucial to the company's success was the younger Antonio, I already said it before, who radically transformed the family business by expanding it at the end of the 19th century to include paintings and also art objects. Thanks to Antonio, the business attracted powerful buyers, among them Edouard and Elie Jacquemart-André, Willem von Bode, but especially Mary and Bernard Berenson. Born in Lithuania in 1865, Bernard Berenson was one of the most famous art historians of the lived between the 19th and 20th century. His real name was Bernard Walbrojenski, and he was, this time really, of Jewish origins, on both his mother's and father's side. His family emigrated to Boston in 1875, where they adopted the surname Berenson. Bernard was a brilliant student. He studied at first at Boston University and later at Harvard, where he developed a deep interest in literature, languages, and especially art. Thanks to private patrons, he began traveling through Europe, and he finally established his residence in Florence in 1890. There, together with his future wife, Mary, he began extensive travels across Italy, and he became one of the most renowned connoisseurs of Renaissance art. He worked also as a consultant to major American collectors. The most important of them was Isabella Stewart Gardner, and published influential works. His residence, Villa I Tatti in Florence, became an international hub for scholars and is now managed by Harvard University. Berenson converted to Catholicism in 1891 and he married Mary in 1900. Started in the late 1890s, and throughout the early decades of the 20th century, the Berensons acquired around 150 works of art for their Florentine home. And between 1907 to 1912, they purchased at least 4 paintings from Antonio Grandi. Their connection with the Milanese dealer is evidenced also by a letter from August 1905, as well as 6 letters sent by Antonio to the collectors between 1906 and 1911, now preserved in the Berenson archive. But the most prominent sector for the Grandi family company was that of reproductive prints. This is evidenced by the fact that in the mid-19th century, Antonio Grandi managed to be competitive in the most vibrant print market of the time, which was London. To achieve this, as I previously mentioned, he partnered with a local print seller named Marseille Middleton Holloway. Holloway's shop was located in London at number 25 of Bedford Street, where it had been active since 1844 in the trade of decorative and ornamental art editions. This business was sold in 1865 to a key figure in the international art market between the 19th and the 20th century, with whom Holloway had been in contact since 1862, Jean-Baptiste Adolphe Goupil, which was founder of a renowned auction house. The Holloway-Grandi correspondence consists in 167 documents which were exchanged between 1851 and 1875. It has been fundamental for understanding the vicissitude on the London shop and also the dealings of the Milanese enterprise, and it is particularly notable for the specificity of its content. Holloway and the Grandi Company exchange almost exclusively reproductive prints. So this letter provides a valuable opportunity to trace from its inception to its conclusion an antiquarian negotiations between Milan and London, shedding light on its key players, their competitors, strategies, sales and transportations method, but also the value of the object traded and the profit margins achieved. These prints reflect the taste and knowledge of the period. In most cases, they were proofs before letter or open letters. I give you now here 2 examples of them, whose acquisition was fervently sought by collectors. Proofs before letter or open letter were the very first print runs made directly from the engraved plate. So they were often produced in very limited numbers, and for the reason they were considered the rarest because only a few copies were printed, and they were the most valuable for collectors because they were closer to the artist's original intent. This correspondence intensified in the spring of 1862, when Antonio and Carlo Grandi informed Holloway that they had acquired a significant number of engravings, aiming to organize an important public sale in London. These prints came from illustrious private collections in Milan, as well as from the Accademia di Brera, which contributed with the crown jewel of the sale, a rare proof before letters with a white place of Raffaello Morgan's Last Supper, which was probably the most famous reproductive print made from Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, still preserved in Milan today. This Morgan's Last Supper was one of the most desired reproductive engravings in all Europe of the time, and only 16 impressions of the proof before letters with the white place existed. De Grandi had managed to obtain one proof through an exchange, likely concluded with the assistance of Giuseppe Baslini. In return, they had delivered to the Accademia di Brera a portrait of a young man by Giovan Battista Moroni, which is still at the Pinacoteca di Brera. After this affair, the correspondence becomes less frequent from the mid-1860s, coinciding with the decline of the reproductive print market. In this final phase, references are made to the innovation that precipitated the crisis of d'après engravings, which is photography. Here you can find some extracts from the letters that testify this little crisis of the business between the two. And very important is Holloway's final communication to Carlo Grandi, dated 1875, that clearly confirms that their business dealings no longer have a reason to continue. I did mention your publication on my return to the manager here, but it seems mostly occupied with modern French pictures. In addition to the correspondence with Holloway, the Grandi archive holds nearly 400 documents, differing in nature, subject matter, and origins, from 1851 to 1927. Until 1894, the communications primarily concerned the buying and selling of prints and drawings, and also the trade in glassware. During this period, the Grandi Company had contacts with print sellers, publishing houses, and antiquarian bookstores across Europe: Basel, Berlin, Paris, Stuttgart, Vienna, Zurich, and Antonio and Carlo had also transatlantic connections with the Irish-born Friedrich Keppel, a print dealer active in New York from 1868. The letters between the late 19th century and the early decades of the following century highlight the new management of the business initiated by Antonio. The company began to deal with paintings, furnishings, and art objects, reaching out to new correspondents, for example, art dealers, restorers, museums, private collectors. Antonio was not only involved in buying and selling, but also in deposits, restoration commissions, and consulting, as well as joint purchases with private individuals. Managing such a multifaceted profession required diplomacy, efficiency, organization, and resourcefulness, qualities that Antonio undoubtedly possessed, and that inherited not only from his immediate predecessor, but also from his brother-in-law, Giuseppe Baslini. So, while Baslini's activity has left traces scattered around the world, emerging gradually and allowing piece by piece, like a puzzle, the reconstruction of this fascinating figure, the Grandi family was more forward-thinking. Their archive and their collection of prints and drawings are now owned by the FAI, the Italian National Trust, and will be the focus of a long-term research and enhancement project. Moreover, in 1957, Grandi heirs had donated to the Raccolta Achille Bertarelli in Milan, a public collection located at the Castello Sforzesco in Milan, over 200 engraved plates that demonstrate the high level of specialization that the company had achieved in the market for reproductive prints. This legacy of artworks and documents opens up new possibilities for studies and research. So the good news is that our work isn't over yet. So I hope I haven't bored you, I hope that everything was clear, and I really thank you for listening and for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martina. It was a very rich and deep presentation of the Italian market and the Jewish presence. And now we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. So please raise your hands or just unmute yourself if you have questions or comments. If not, I will start with one question regarding the family background of Baslini. So where was he born? Maybe I just missed.
He was
If you could just...
He was born probably near Pavia.
So in Italy.
In Italy, maybe in a little place, but not in a town, not in a city. And his family was very poor, very simple. We know that at the beginning he probably could write only his name, or nothing more than this. So he was illiterate.
But do you know where the family came from? I mean, no.
No. No.
And the other question is this research will be available in English somewhere or only in Italian?
Yes, because I published some articles in English. One about Baslini for the Oxford Journal for the History of Collections, and another one is coming about Grandi's business for a volume which will be published by the University of Chicago. But I tried to publish in English because I think that this tool is particularly interesting for not only for Italy but for also European people.
That's right. I agree. We have comment in the chat.
Oh, thank you very much.
Elena Shapira. Thank you for the fascinating lecture.
I have a question, if
Yes.
nobody else has a question. I was wondering about your talk. There has been research about networks of art dealers, of Jewish art dealers in Europe. And you referred to selling to their sales in London and also the growing interest in modern art. Did they have this network, especially through the German, the art director, the director of the museum in Berlin, Bode? Did you follow any networks that they developed?
About Jewish?
In the late 19th century, yeah.
I concentrated only on Italian art dealers, but in Italy we don't have, I have not found Jewish art dealers. And it is strange because I was sure I would have found someone of them, but I did not. Maybe in Europe, in other countries, we could find someone of them, but I did not open my research to other countries.
Yeah. because Berenson worked with Jewish dealers, art dealers. Berenson himself worked as an expert,
Yes, thank you. It was a very interesting talk and very rich in facts and original research. I was very impressed. Maybe if I could follow up with the previous question, what about clients? Any Jewish clients, rabbinic clients, or Jewish community leaders that you were able to document?
Not in this phase, not in the second half of the 19th century. I have not found, for example, important Jewish collectors in Milan. No.
Maybe in other parts of Italy?
Maybe, but in Milan, no. They were not Jewish, but until 1993, until they discovered this document, I was talking about this list of Jewish people who was living in Milan. We did not have any documental evidence of Jewish presence in Milan. It is the only document that refers about Jewish presence and also their profession. So I think that, but we have long lists of private collections in Milan. There's a wide literature about private collections in Milan, but no one of them was Jewish. Maybe they became collectors in the following century, I think. I think they had more possibilities in the first half
of the 20th century.
Maybe at the beginning of the 20th, yes.
But in your period, it would be interesting to look at other centers like Venice, Padua, Trieste, perhaps regions like this, where because there we had Jewish communities that were collecting manuscripts. There were a lot of important manuscript collectors there. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were also collecting art along with it, but it's just a thought. But I have no actual evidence to think. But But I understand you're focused in Milan, so it's already such a giant project already. I can see.
Yes.
So, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Miriam, please. We don't hear you, Miriam. Miriam, we don't hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fascinating lecture based on really very thorough and rich research. I'm actually continuing a question of Liol and a little bit also Elena. There were Jewish families. I'm specifically talking about one. It's not my field, and just by chance I came to that information. For instance, a family Mond from London, Ludwig Mond. They're originally from Germany, but in the mid-19th century they settled in London. He was a collector of Renaissance art. Now, they were coming regularly to Italy. They had a villa in Rome, and they had actually art collected both in Rome and in their houses in England. So I don't know if specifically that family, but do you have any information about Jewish collectors collecting, for instance, Renaissance art that were regularly coming to Italy for vacation, but also to purchase art, and whether they all concentrating on Milan, but I mean, if someone is buying, I'm sure is pretty mobile and could contact dealers also in different city in order to purchase art that is interested in. So did you ever come to such connections between Jewish collectors from other cities in Europe that were physically coming to Italy and buying art there?
No.
No?
No, never.
Okay,
Never really.
it's a fascinating topic, and thank you very much for this lecture.
Thank you very much.
What about Lodi? Even Lodi? Or it is not your focus anymore?
Cosa?
I mean,
What?
the city of Lodi. I mean, not only Milan, but the cities around Milan. So do we have any other? I just mentioned this. I will talk about after. So do you
Okay,
have
okay.
the other questions and comments? Yes, please, Ernesto. We don't hear you.
It was very interesting and detailed and dry lesson, and I've got some special idea from my education, but maybe that's not so dry. In my when I grew up in Austria, at school, we learned about Giuseppe Verdi and Nabucco, and it's all this time. And in the lesson, we heard about a Jewish trader who made his life by selling culture from of the in the land and culture he's living. And for example, it was about Christian works and Catholic, and the other kind is about antique Roman and Greek culture, and he was best selling. And this was his profession. And the other was from the opposite, that was growing in this time of Italy, and that was which we heard also about. That was the growing of the Italian nation, and the problems between Habsburg and Napoleonic possessions and political affairs. And there was also at that time, it was the time that Italy had grown to a nation.
Yes.
And the link to my own history is that at school, as I mentioned, we learned about Verdi, and they told us that's a romantic idea to get some old mentioned idea from an old culture and put it into the present and get from some people that was in Nabucco somewhere, and or in Syria at some kings and so, and there was some fight about freedom. But the idea is Verdi wrote that because of the to guess he guessed to they told us he guessed to strengthen the revolution idea of Italy. That's what we learned at school. Mm-hmm. And in my life, that happened that I didn't know nothing about Jewish roots of my family. But when my grandmother died when he was set to that coffin. It was her wish to play the chorus of the inhabitants of Israel. That's the main theme of Verdi's opera Nabucco. And so I guess and hope to get some to close some half circles to an whole circle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very
Ernesto.
interesting. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Thank you again, Martina. It was really
Thank you.
inspiring. And we invite everybody for the next lecture, actually the last lecture of this department seminar, which will take place next week, the same day, the same time, by Daniela Schmidt. And she will talk about exhibition at the Jewish Museum in Vienna. So I hope we can see you again next week. And thank you again, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.